The problem here is that how do you distinguish fact from fiction? What is reputable? What is non-reputable? Reputable source and so forth. To some people, the New York Times is very reputable. To others, it's not, and Fox News is very reputable. Um, Probably, my thought is to try to deal with facts. If we could somehow deal with facts in there and make things so that it's verifiable. But again, we come to the question of how do you do this? And remember, if the US regulates something, that doesn't affect the rest of the world, just like the rest of the world can regulate things and it shouldn't affect the US at all. I'm not optimistic either. You're on mute again.
On that note of optimism, let me just ask one question about overall ballot access and how you guys feel about free access to the ballot by Americans wherever they live, in whatever walk of life they find themselves. There's a lot of concern, I suppose, about the variations in ballot access due to either implied voter suppression or the more limited availability of mail-in ballot, or earlier or later closing voter registration versus voter registration on election day. How do you guys come down? Are we generally open enough, or is the variation problematic? Go ahead, Duncan.
Well, I've been speaking first. I'll let Matt.
Okay.
I was going to say that I very strongly believe that every voter should have the ability, not just the right, but the ability to cast a ballot. And one of the things that worries me a lot about the situation is that based on previous voting patterns and other information, you can use machine learning to identify specific groups of voters and then target them. It's the old, okay, folks, there are too many people voting and we can't count all the ballots. So Democrats vote Tuesday, Republicans vote Wednesday, that sort of thing. I am rather depressed when I see steps being taken to disenfranchise people who should be able to vote. The technology can help here, providing, again, you produce a paper trail, but the will to use the technology in the places where it could be distributed or where it could be enhanced by laws and such doesn't seem to be there. The election officials that I know certainly want it, but at higher levels of government, there seems to be not as much will to do this.
And Duncan?
Yeah, I think this is a problem. I do believe there is overt suppression of voters in some areas and in some jurisdictions, and I think that's a problem. I'm perhaps a little more optimistic because what we are seeing in 2020 is the exposure of the differences between access across the country. So the fact that things are different and some people have more access than others might help improve the situation. What is not helping in this election is the 275 lawsuits that are ongoing, still not yet settled, that causes a lot of confusion. I mean, South Carolina has now gone back and forth and back and forth and back again on witness signatures. And that kind of confusion, I think, is a problem. The other thing that has come up, and I've dealt a lot with the League of Women Voters and their attempts to educate voters. Given that the rules are different across the country, the national news has a lot of information that people listen to that doesn't apply to them. And they ask questions, what about X? Well, if your state doesn't have that rule or law, X doesn't apply, you just happen to hear about it on national news. So I think the increased discussion of the variations has been a good thing, and it may lead to some improvements. South Carolina, for example, has 17 excuses for voting absentee. I think Mississippi has 1, and it doesn't even include being hospitalized in a car wreck on the same day as an election. So I think there has been an improvement. There is no doubt that there is voter suppression, and there is no doubt that targeting certain demographics or certain cities would have significant effects, and people can do the analysis and they can figure out where they want to target. You could depends on which state you're in, which city or which area you wish to target, and which direction you want to change the results. That part certainly is possible.
I take it from that comment that you feel that anything less than a national set of at least baseline standards is likely to fail. Is that a fair consensus statement? That we need some sort of common basis of at least standards here?
I don't know. So again, given that the states are delegated in the Constitution the manner of elections,
Right.
The way this has been changed in the past has been that laws were passed or court decisions were made that affected elections involving federal candidates. And I remember when the voter registration time went down to 30 days. And I remember when the voting age went down to 18. And in both cases, those were preceded by decisions about federal elections that the states eventually decided it was too much of a pain to try to separate from local elections. So there could be some normalization of the way things are done. I think in the near term, say the next 5 years, that's likely to be done by grassroots initiatives from various places saying, look, other people are doing it better, differently, more accessible, and they're not having disasters. Why can't we?
Matt, anything to add? Nothing to add, Matt?
No, nothing to add.
Fair enough. So Paul, if you have some questions to pose, I think this is a good time to break in.
Thank you, David, and thank you again to everyone for your patience with our technical problems. We've gotten some questions that came in with registration, and we're still waiting. I'm not sure if everybody's been able to access the chat, so we're trying to figure that piece out as well. But let me just go ahead and ask some of the few questions that came in when we got registrations from everybody. So first is, what is the concept of fair elections? Please describe it theoretically and practically. So going to the title of the panel today.
Can I frame that a little bit to sort of
Please, you're the political scientist.
Okay,
That would be helpful.
so for me, some things that are often highlighted in discussions about fair elections is sort of access to the ballot, equal access to the ballot of different cohorts of society, by age, by ethnicity, by where you live. So one aspect of fairness is common standards equally applied. So, the voting experience of someone in Colorado should approximate that of someone in South Carolina, even if the rules may be different. So that would be one attribute of national fairness in elections. Another might be rules to restrict voter suppression, the effectiveness of voter suppression, Voting Rights Acts, things like that, which might safeguard fairness. Again, that access to the ballot focus. Another might be transparency in an election so that voters can understand what is occurring on their behalf when votes are tabulated and then validated through some sort of audit process. So that's the way I kind of think about fairness. You know, freedom from discrimination as well in terms of access is a key tenet. So that's kind of the standpoint I bring.
Two comments. This is Matt. Two comments. First of all, transparency. I think that is absolutely critical. And one of the questions that's very interesting to me is transparent to whom? For example, if you're using a voting machine, a computer scientist can go through it and determine whether or not it will produce credible results. But for example, my father, he was a writer. He finally started using a computer in 2000 when a publisher rejected a manuscript on paper. He never learned to do cut and paste. He would treat it just like a typewriter. What a computer scientist would tell him, what would convince a computer scientist would be completely meaningless to him. So you have to aim transparency at your average voter. As far as what constitutes a fair election, basically, to me, the idea is that everyone who is legally qualified to vote should be able to vote. They should be able to see that their votes are counted. They should be able to follow the entire process to be sure that it works the way it should, and and that includes guarantees of accuracy, the accuracy of the count, the anonymity of the ballot, and so forth. The reason I was shaking my head when you said that a voter experience in Colorado should approximate that of, I think, South Carolina. Anyway, that's to me is more a question of uniformity.
Okay.
And I think what's more important than uniformity is the credibility and the transparency and the belief that the elections are, the evidence that the elections are being handled according to law.
Yeah, I think I think you have to look at the entire process. Voter registration should be available to all citizens legally qualified, and those who are legally disqualified should be disqualified for legitimate reasons and not capricious ones. Voter registration should be something that everyone can perform. And right now, there's an enormous question about the digital divide and whether, if all you do is make web services available, are you deliberately not providing access to that information to people who don't have the same digital access or don't have broadband? So it starts with voter registration, and I will say I am old enough to be able to remember the effect that the Civil Rights Law and the Voting Rights Act had in Louisiana in the 1960s when I was growing up there. And it was a world-changing event. So I think access, first of all, through registration is important. Then in the election process, there are always questions, and Charles Stewart has done several papers pointing out that precincts with heavily minority populations tend to have longer lines in many parts of the United States because there is an inadequate or a perceived inadequate distribution of voting computer resources. And given that voting computers are expensive, it's easy to just drop one or two in any precinct locally and have an effect that you can't really be charged, to have made deliberately. That can happen. That was certainly, there was a reverse version of that was charged in my own county in 2012 when we had 7-hour wait times. And the analysis of the data that I did showed that there was no distribution of the pain. We all suffered almost uniformly across the county. We went to a quadrennial election with a third of our hardware in the warehouse. That just wasn't smart. And for things like polling places, I know we work hard. And again, this is local. We have 5 satellite locations plus county headquarters for in-person absentee voting right now. And we have made an effort to make them scattered across the county to make sure that we have covered, that nobody really has to drive 2 miles out of town of, what was it, Dodge City, Kansas, in order to find the polling place. And then after the fact, transparency is everything. Elections, there's a reality game in getting the right answer, and there's a perception game in that the voters have to believe you got the right answer. And the only way to win the perception game is by being transparent about the process and making sure that you're not hiding anything. I often cite phone conversation I had with Carolyn Cernick, who was clerk of court or elections director in Humboldt County, California, who said, "I never want to have to tell my voters, just trust me." And I think that would go a long way to improving confidence if we all adopted that approach.
Thanks. Paul?
Kind of following along the same theme, question is, what should be the appropriate roles of national and local political officials on election day and afterwards to reassure voters that the elections were fair or not fair?
I'm not sure who you mean by political or by political officials. Basically, the political officials should stay out of the way of the election officials and not interfere with how they're conducting the election. It's perfectly fair to demand a recount, but beyond that, you do want the elections to have credibility, and unless you have some basis for calling them into question, don't.
I think in most jurisdictions, it is perfectly legal to have poll watchers from advocacy groups and or political parties. I was a poll watcher at one precinct in 2012 in my own county, and the rules were quite straightforward. We were allowed to watch. We were not supposed to initiate a conversation with any voter in line. And that was the election that went south, and we had such huge lines. More than once, like 5 or 6 times, I stood there and asked the poll clerk whether it was okay to talk to the voter who was having trouble voting. And we called county headquarters to try to fix things. But there are generally very fixed regulations on what poll watchers can do. There are also regulations about what political people can do. They're not supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be hanging around. They are perfectly permitted to go vote at their local precinct. But there are lots of rules about political activity and observation. We just had this decision rendered down in Philadelphia that the satellite locations are not considered polling places according to that judge's decision. So I think what we want is that everybody has a chance to observe and nobody is permitted to disrupt.
I noticed exclamation points in the chat from people who, maybe those are the people who posed your questions, Paul, but go right ahead.
I am still waiting to get questions in the chat, but if someone else has them from our team, it can send them to me. But we have a couple more questions from people who registered.
Sure, please go.
Yeah, so one question, very straightforward. Why is there so much distrust in mail-in ballots?
Well, so when I first got involved, one of the questions that kept coming up was, are the mail-in absentee ballots even counted? That if the jurisdiction comes in and they have 1,000 absentee mail-in ballots and everybody won by 2,000 votes, do they even count them? And what I was assured then was, yes, at least in Richland County, at least in South Carolina, we count them all. There is the one problem that you do have is that you are signing something You are sending it in, and not every jurisdiction gives you the right to cure. So if our ballots come in without a witness signature in Richland County or anywhere in South Carolina, they will simply be put aside and not looked at, because the Supreme Court has now said that we need a witness signature. And the voters won't know. I think that's part of the distrust, is you don't know. If you go to a polling place and you mark a ballot and you stick it in the scanner and it's not going to score, the scanner these days will kick it back out and you get another ballot so that you can fix the problem. You don't have that problem with mail-in. So there's an inherent trust that you can read and get things right. The other political discussion about mail-in ballots, there are all kinds of accusations about fraud, and virtually none of those have any justification. It's really very hard to do wholesale fraud of mail-in ballots, because names are checked, existence of votes by voters is checked, the format of the ballot is checked, the envelopes are checked. It is not just, here's a bunch of stuff, count these things. And the people who are saying that would be fraudulent, I think are just not listening to the facts coming from election officials. And I've heard a lot of election officials comment about this.
Short answer, yes. Everything, I agree with everything Duncan said. Here in Yolo County, we had exactly the same situation, where there was a widespread rumor that if absentee ballots wouldn't change things, they're not going to be counted. Same with provisionals. The election officials here spent quite a bit of time refuting those rumors. As I think another reason for a lack of confidence may be distrust of the post office, because things do get lost in the mail or they arrive late. And that's why people are suggesting mail your ballot early. But many counties have drop boxes in places where people go. So you can always drop something into the box instead of sending it through the post office. Here, those boxes are cleaned out every night. So those votes are all counted.
I will also say, I think every jurisdiction across the country is expecting a large increase in the number of mail ballots this year. In 2016, my county had 15,000 mail ballots, 40,000 in-person absentee, and 115,000 on election day. We had 15,000 4 years ago. We have already mailed out more than 46,000 mail ballots this time around. So, but everybody has been preparing for this. Everybody has known there would be this onslaught. It's going to be a logistical hassle. The legislature has permitted us to start opening outer envelopes on Sunday. For the June primary, we could do it on Monday prior to Election Day. We can't start tabulating until Tuesday on Election Day. But I think all of the election officials that I have been in contact with have known that there was going to be a big logistics issue, and they're taking steps to handle this influx of paper.
Just on that point, do either of you anticipate weeks-long or months-long delays in producing a result in your jurisdictions that you're familiar with, or is it sort of days? In the media, we hear all sorts of estimates for this.
On a previous event, War made the comment that it's always been election week. The public thinks it's election day, but it's never been that. So in South Carolina, we are required to certify by Friday. So it's going to be tight. And I think we are concerned that after days of overwork, we're going to handle 50,000 pieces of mail, ballot, starting Tuesday morning and be able to have a count that we can certify by Friday. We may not have certification by, we certainly won't have it at 7:01 p.m. on election day. And I keep saying somewhat humorously that we need to get little squirt bottles filled with chloroform and put a spritz or two in front of every journalist in the country to just mellow them out enough to wait. We are not a society that delays gratification. I think we will certainly have the results by Wednesday noon with all of the votes counted. We may not have it, it may not be possible Tuesday night, but we're going to be cranking through it. We bought another scanner so we can scan paper. We've got 35 people just in my county who will be handling absentee ballots. So we're ready. I think we can do it. And I think every jurisdiction in the country is planning for the same thing.
That's certainly true here. In California, every voter was mailed a ballot.
Okay.
And so we're going to see a huge number of mail-in ballots. Now in California, last time I looked, the certification deadline was, I think, 21 or 22 days after the election. So it's not going to be quite as bad as your situation, Duncan. But that also reminded me that there may be another reason for some distrust of mail-in ballots if the wrong ballots go out to certain groups. And here we just had an incident where the wrong ballots were sent out because a precinct line was misdrawn in the conversion of the data from one registration system to another. The election official spotted it, immediately reported it, and said, started sending out new ballots. That led to another thing where some people were reporting that their ballots lacked the correct school district election. And the problem was that the school district boundaries are different than the city council boundaries, which messed everything up for people. So there was no problem there, but there was a perception of a problem. The election officials are explaining this quite publicly and letting people know what's going on. So they're handling it very, very well.
Wow, the complexity here.
Yeah, so even in our June primary, we had a number of voters saying they were getting the wrong ballot. And I think, I have lived in the same house now for 20 years, and my county council district has switched a couple of times back and forth. So I haven't necessarily always known. And how often do you really know and care about who your county council person might be? So I think there is a problem with voters. I mean, in the computing world, we would call this operator error. People just don't know exactly all their jurisdictions. They see ads. I see ads, on my way to the main road for a bunch of people who aren't going to be on my ballot. So people see the ads, they think that that's where they are, but they're not. They're just kind of over the border. There are problems. I don't think we're going to get it perfect. I doubt that there will be many jurisdictions in the country that will be perfect in November, but I think everybody is doing their best to have as few actual errors as possible.
This is where transparency is really important, because if there's an error and it's corrected, people can see that it's being corrected, then then that actually, in my mind, improves credibility, because number one, you had enough control of the election so you could spot it, and number two, you knew how to fix it.
Yeah.
So to me, that's why transparency is so critically important to all this. As far as ballots go, we have an interesting problem here. I'm not sure it's a problem, but Davis switched from at-large elections to district elections. And so instead of having all the council candidates on your ballot and all the school board candidates on your ballot, you only have those who represent your districts. And there's been quite a bit of publicity about that, but I'm willing to bet that there still is some confusion.
Yeah, I mean, my own has little 2x2 square block areas that are not part of the city, in the middle of the city. So if there's a city election, they get a different ballot style. And we have had as many as 8 different ballot styles just in my precinct.
Wow.
So this is, it's because they're all chopped up in different, we have precincts in my county with 2 different congressional districts. And you know, so there is confusion. There's going to be confusion. Good information, reliable information helps. It's not going to cure the problem completely.
So just the last, oh, I would say a last question, a question about litigation, lengthening the period during which these results are finally really certified. I assume that's a bigger risk in California than it is in South Carolina. That's just an assumption based on imperfect knowledge. Duncan, what do you think? Is litigation going to interfere with the ability to certify?
I don't think it will here. No, we do have a couple of lawsuits still ongoing, but the lawsuits I'm aware of around the country elsewhere are voter registration deadlines. I don't think we have one of those.
Okay.
We may have one that would push it 2 weeks early and would be ending about now. The lawsuits in Ohio about ballot drop boxes, we don't have that. We will have, we had legislation. We are not allowed to have unattended ballot drop boxes. We are permitted to have ballot drop boxes that are attended in the satellite locations. So right now we have 6 locations across my county. There are also our absentee ballots have to arrive by 7 p.m. on November 3rd. A lot of the litigation is how many days afterward, and is it postmarked or received or whatever. I think those are the issues, and I'm kind of, whether it's good or bad that we don't have that litigation, at least I don't have to worry about that.
How about your situation, Matt? You're muted.
Okay, I need to emphasize here that while I work with our county election officials, I am not a county election official. Okay.
Fair.
Given that, there's not much litigation going on here that I'm aware of at all.
Oh, okay.
We can receive ballots that are postmarked on or before Election Day. I think they can come in. I can't remember whether it's 3 days after or 17 days after, but it's somewhere in there. And as far as I know, there's been absolutely no litigation about any of that here.
Oh, okay. Good to know. So Paul, what
Dave,
do
we did not get the chat questions that we hoped for, but I can give my email right now. I have one other question, and depending on how long our panelists have, we have managed to maintain our audience despite the technical problems. So everybody is still with us. So if you want to give a few extra minutes for people to email me questions while I'm at or after I ask this question, we can do that, or however you prefer. So if folks want to send me email questions at pbrown at umd. I'm sorry, pbrown15 at umd.edu. I will check my phone and ask those questions as they come in. In the meantime, one final question that we got from our registration. Are there certain activities or anomalies that voters should pay attention to on election day and afterwards to be ensured of or concerned about a fair election?
I think I think voters should be aware of the possibility of interference at the polling places. I know this coming Friday, so yeah, this coming Friday, we have an election commission meeting, and we have the city police chief and the county sheriff. They're not allowed to be there at the polling place, which is a good thing, but we need to make sure that they are on call if there are problems. The other part is just be aware of what transparency options are available. If you want to observe and observation is permitted, that can be done. At the polling place, for example, certainly in South Carolina, and I think a lot of states, there's supposed to be a zero tape posted at the door when the polling place is opened, and an exit tape with the results. Check that those are there. People these days, reporters used to telephone the numbers in. They simply take photos and collect them all. There are ways, given the transparency that exists, for people to at least monitor what's going on, and if necessary, call into people who can make a difference in rectifying any problems.
Yes, I agree that the poll at the voter assistance centers here, the issue would be that's what you should look out for, any kind of intimidation or anything like that. They won't tolerate, they will not tolerate it here. The other thing too is, if you have concerns about the way ballots are being counted and such, I assume other counties do this, but our county will allow you to come in and actually watch them being counted. With scanners, you have to stand back because you can't go to where the ballots actually are, but it's in the same room. It's basically a corner area. And you know, there have been times there have been 15 to 20 people there. At times there's been one or two, and you know, and so go ahead and go there and watch how they're doing things.
Yeah, and Matt raised the issue. There are election hotlines that you can telephone. I remember in 2012, where I was a poll watcher, the lines were about 3 to 3.5 hours long. When I went to vote myself, it took me 90 minutes to check in. And as I was in the second 90 minutes waiting for a voting computer, I called one of the hotlines, and Common Cause got back to me from somebody who was observing from a mobile trailer in New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy, that she had called downtown and it was a disaster everywhere. But there are hotlines that you can call. The League of Women Voters has one. The Election Integrity Project has a hotline. And these are people who can call the right people to make things change.
Just a question, sort of at a higher level of generality, I suppose, for us. Post this election, obviously there are going to be postmortems written about how well we did or how we didn't do. How would you guys feel about a commission of some sort to look at the 2020 election with a mandate to recommend changes in the way that at least the nation approaches its elections, from making Election Day a holiday to much more granular recommendations about transparency and open ballots? Is that something that you think would be useful?
I think it would. I think there was some advantage 12 when the Presidential Election Assistance Commission produced a report. My copy of that report is signed by Tammy Patrick, whom I know, who was on the commission. There is a report that Charles Stewart produces for conference at William and Mary every 2 years. That generally is viewed as rock solid analysis. It would not hurt to have either of those repeated or endorsed or elevated. If we get through this, we're going to have some problems somewhere, but pointing out who got through it with fewer problems and why would be very advantageous.
Yeah, to me, it would depend a lot on what the precise charge of the committee was.
Sure.
One of the things that I think is absolutely critical is, I agree with Duncan about the postmortem, but it can't be, boy, did these people screw up. It's got to be, okay, what could have been done better? Because if you start pointing fingers, all of a sudden, people are much less inclined to work with you or believe you, and it would generally create chaos.
So is this something that you think universities or research think tanks could provide, to dispassionate, arm's length from politics, perhaps, could at least begin, perhaps through the two reports you mentioned?
Well, certainly Charles Stewart's report carries a lot of weight coming out of MIT.
Okay.
And his is a factual report. He generally does not point fingers. The PEAC report, I don't think pointed fingers. And I agree. You can't just simply say, you know, these people did a lousy job. What you have to say is there were places for which the following was done and it turned out not to be the right thing to do. And let's not do that in the future. You know, I did this analysis for my county in 2012. I got called in as a consultant by Maricopa County, Arizona in 2016 after they had a similar disaster in the presidential preference primary. And the question was, you know, how do you diminish lines? How do you manage lines? How do you figure out what the resources need to be? So I think it can be done. I don't know. I'm not sure actually how the Presidential Commission in 2012 that produced a report in 2013 was set up. But I think it would be enormously expensive. And certainly that one was chaired by Ben Ginsberg and Bob Bauer, both of whom were highly respected attorneys, one from each party. So
certainly, if this has happened, it sounds like there's probably significant lessons learned already documented. And maybe the first step is, rather than a commission, just collecting the lessons learned and then ranking them in terms of what you want to do about them, I suppose. Might be a more profitable way to get moving. I'm always looking for shortcuts in everything in things of this nature. And Paul,
the way this election is running, I think I don't know that we need shortcuts. I think we need this particular election with all of its ups and downs.
Fair, but if we want systemic recommendations to be undertaken, we can't focus on just one election. We need to have an assessment of durable suggestions that seem to be sensible across different cycles, I think. And Paul, for your edification, it strikes me that NASPA and Civic might be uniquely competent. This is the public affairs schools inside the United States. Might be really a good platform for something like that. Especially for the land grant university like ours, like the ones represented here, that, you know, dispassionate, nonpartisan, fair amount of expertise, some contact with election officials such as Duncan and others. That's a not bad place to start. Gathering expertise and experience and trying to boil that down into something that can make things a little bit better. You know, I'm fond of incremental improvement.
Well, if I could push back slightly on your suggestion not to focus on this election, my suspicion is that if there is a mistake to be made in running elections in this country, that mistake will be made somewhere in the United States this season. So
agree.
Maybe get better data, and then we can sort down as to which ones are more significant.
I agree with that. I just don't want to do the equivalent of the hanging Chad solution from 2000 that then gives us the EAC. So that's not sort of, anyway, just a comment. So Paul, how are we doing?
We've gotten a couple more questions, so if our panelists wouldn't mind indulging us for a few more minutes. Can qualifications to vote be made uniform across the nation? Aren't states jealous of their jurisdiction in this?
So and I forget exactly what changed the 30-day registration. Registration in the 60s in some places was a year residency. And it was changed to 30 days on the basis that the country was more mobile than it had been when a year residency seemed reasonable. And then I forget exactly what changed the age from 21 to 18 everywhere. By the Constitution, the states have the power to manage their elections. And the federal government has limited ability, generally only for federal elections, not for local elections. And so that would have to be done, you know, walking a very fine line as to permissible under the Constitution.
One final question. This person asks, I noticed a CAPTCHA question when completing an absentee ballot request online. Can you speak to whether requiring accurate responses to these questions is fair?
So, okay. So one of the celebrated instances is when I think it was Miami-Dade County got like 2,500 requests for absentee ballot from something that was a bot. The CAPTCHA would prevent that. It is unfortunately the case that a lot of rules like that one probably come in response to a problem that occurred earlier that would fix that problem. Is that the best way to fix the problem? I don't know. And I don't remember. So the problem was even worse because we're not allowed to request an absentee ballot online. We are allowed to request the application for the absentee ballot, which we must print out and sign and mail in or hand deliver. You know, is that the best approach or not? I don't know. What it will certainly do is make it a lot harder for a bot to request tens of thousands of absentee ballots.
Yeah, that's the idea. CAPTCHAs are fairly effective in doing that. In fact, they're quite effective. One suggestion I would have is if you're going to put up a CAPTCHA, perhaps you could put up a phone number as well, so that if the person for some reason can't handle the CAPTCHA, they can call and then you can verify something. You can verify them.
Good idea. Yeah.
Makes sense. So Paul, are we you want to wrap it up?
Yeah.
So Duncan and Matt, I'd like to thank you for your patience.
Oh, I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for the opportunity to do this before. I'll do this now.
No, thank you for your time. We understand how busy you both are in this time period, and this has been very, very informative to me and to our audience, I hope, in understanding the dilemmas of the risks to election and what it takes to actually run an election in 2020 in America. It's not an easy task. And to both of you, thank you for your service, I have to say, to making our elections a little bit more transparent and a little bit more understandable to people. Even to those of us, yes, I cross my fingers as well. Even to those of us who think we know more about elections than we apparently do. Because I'm learning everything, something new from each one of these panels. So thank you. Thank you to attendees, and thank you to both of you. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much.
And Paul, you're the one in control of the mic here. Do you want to say your goodbye?
Yeah, we got a couple minutes left. If I could do a quick plug for the next panel that we're doing. This today was the second of three, and the first one we did was last week on safe elections, and the link to that video and a summary of that event should be available on our website. And then next week, at the same time on Monday, we have an event called Empowering Voters, an Accessible and Full Ballot Box, and getting to some of the issues we talked about today regarding disenfranchisement and trying to empower as many voters as possible. And along those same lines, the School of Public Policy has a Brody Forum series on, and it's called Mobilizing Those Who Matter, a conversation with Nikidra Robinson, who's the founder and CEO of Black Girls Vote. So that should be a really interesting, both those events should be really interesting. And information and a link to register to both of those events are available on our website. And just one more word of gratitude to our panelists and to our audience for sticking with us during some difficult technical issues. This was WebEx, not Zoom. And so we had a couple of things that popped up, but thank you again for your questions, and to the panelists for their expertise, and to our great moderator for leading a really interesting discussion. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.